I was back in camp when I saw the broadcast. By the looks of it, 3 teams were about to fight, and there was no telling if we'd be able to stop all of this before eliminations happen. Hearth, get Prodigal. Things are going wrong. Hearth nodded and looked into the distance. Ravajatik was broadcasting like normal, but hadn't been speaking to us much outside of that. Avoiding us? Possible. I'd threatened him, but there was something else. Then I heard Val's name and confirmed it. Something had shifted. Azoku came running up the bluff, Chathuxel shortly behind him.
We will rush to Val's aid.
I shook my head.
Won't make it in time. This whole fight's gonna go down fast. Problem is, Val ain't a fighter. Top athlete, sure, but not a fighter. And all those guys are fighting for their survival. Damn it. I wish I could step in or... Hearth.
Hearth turned.
I believe I understand what you wish to. How does your species comprehend this possibility? Possibilities? Science, fiction. You make up stories to extrapolate future possibilities for entertainment.
Not now. Is it possible?
Hearth pondered for a moment.
It is possible. Theoretically. With trills, it would be simple, but your minds are different than ours. Humans more than the other species. And you more than that. It could be dangerous.
No hesitation.
Do it.
Hearth nodded one final time, laying a hand on my shoulder, and I got the sudden feeling of when an elevator started moving. What I was sensing shifted, and with a lurch, I realized what it was. I was connected through Hearth and Prodigal to Val. The screens were darting forward, taking advantage of Val grabbing the attention of the others. And now it was a melee. Val shouted for Cheyenne to go for the screens, while she was charging the larger goal. Attached, I knew the moves to bring him down and fell back on my training. Val was startled for a moment, but she followed it. She hopped, twisting her body, and caught the lock she was looking for, both of them tumbling to the ground, and she came up on top, planting her knee on his neck.
I felt Keith's memories, different ones this time. Instead of him broadcasting pain, it was his memories of fighting, the memories of someone else who had spent their whole life training, just a different kind. I saw what he wanted me to do in a fraction of a second and complied, bringing the big man down and planting my knee as he struggled under me. Now what? My hand went up instinctively, aware of the hatchet thrown by one of the Vendricks. It was pure instinct as I caught the handle of the hatchet just as I felt the female goal coming from the other direction. Instead of trying to stop the momentum, I shifted it and let the hatchet fly. The blunt back of the hatchet connected with her forehead and she was stunned. Where the hell did you learn that one, Keith?
Not me.
There was no time, and I had an opening. I charged, tackling her at the waist, and took her to the ground. The images that came to me were straightforward, and using the flat of my own hatchet against her temple, I knocked her out, grabbing her wristband. I looked around, and the fight was everywhere. Shin had rushed the screns, and I watched as he hopped off a tree, extending both feet the same as I had when I'd drop-kicked him before, and one scren went down. The other tried to run, but Shin was faster. Meanwhile, Prodigal had the Vendricks coming at him. They tag-teamed him, keeping up a constant stream of attacks at the trill, but every swing missed, Prodigal sidestepping. Meanwhile, the big goal was struggling up from the ground on his hands and knees. The images from Keith's head weren't from training this time, but something from UFC. It looked good, and I rushed back, diving over his back and grabbed on. I wrapped one arm around his neck, using the other to secure it, while my legs wrapped around his waist, locking me in place. And as he struggled to break free, I locked the hold in tighter, cutting off his air. For a time, he thrashed around and ended up on top of me, but I just held on. It felt like minutes, but I'm certain it was faster than that. His struggles lessened, and I felt his body relax, and finally stop moving. Releasing the grip, I followed the next image and checked for his heartbeat, and it was still beating, so I took his wristband. The goal were down for the moment at least. The screns had been wrapped up by Shin, who was beaming, and we both began advancing on the Vendricks.
Shin, take their wristbands. Vendricks, stop!
One, a woman with blonde hair and purple eyes, looked to me, the two Goal and Shin, retrieving wristbands from the fallen screns. She muttered something, which I assume was a curse, and signaled her teammate. The Vendricks knew they were done.
Why do you take the wristbands?
To halt elimination. We want you in our tribe. We're not enemies.
I kept it a matter of fact, as I fished out the boon bag for the Vendrix and tossed it to her.
Your people sent us this to show trust. We want to beat the real enemy, the Kathrall Dominion. Now, I have to break down an alien deer. Shin, Prodigal, secure the Skrens, and goal.
She opened the bag and pulled out a string of clay coins with holes in the middle to keep them all on the same string. She looked up, startled, and I went over to the creature this whole thing had started over. As I knelt down, I got images of an old man with a thick white mustache wearing a John Deere cap and camo. He was smiling and instructing Pop. Keith's grandfather taught him how to break down his first deer. I followed the instructions, removing the innards, careful not to puncture the stomach, and put them in a separate bag, then removed the hide and worked on breaking the animal down. Pop's instructions in my head the whole way. As I finished up, I could see the goal and Skrens bound to trees, and the Vendrix seemed to be standing by, waiting to find out what happened next. The goals had come awake, but bound as they were, there was no chance of escape. I got up and went to the Skrens first, who seemed to be more calculating.
I have a gift from your people here. We're not your enemies, and we have a camp with food, water, and shelter.
I gave them the bag and untied them. It still looked like they would bolt for a moment, but one produced a small pouch from the bag.
You bring us this? How did you get this?
I told you, your people sent us this. We don't want to fight you, and we took your wristbands so you couldn't be eliminated when we knocked you out. You don't have to come, but it's better if you do.
I knelt down, bringing myself level with them. The Skrens didn't immediately agree, but they didn't run, so I'd take it. I felt Keith's presence leave my mind, and honestly, I felt a little bad when it did. It was weird, but getting to see his Pop was nice. I turned to the final group, who were clearly none too pleased.
You are the goal. I am Val, and I am not your enemy. This is a boon from your people to show you that I speak the truth. Join our tribe.
I came back to myself and hit the ground immediately. Every color and point of light was intensified, and my vision was swimming. My senses were screaming, even just the feel of the ground beneath me. I shut my eyes and had Hearth help me back to my shelter. I cut off as much of my senses as I could and just focused on my own breathing. I know Hearth was speaking, but for the life of me, it was all just a cacophony, and it was a release when I passed out of consciousness.
Oddly, the female spoke first.
You have bested us both in combat. We are bound to your command now.
I sighed and began untying them.
I need none to command, and the stakes are too high. Here's my command. I command you to choose for yourselves. You can choose to join us, or you can choose to keep fighting alone. Either way is on you.
She looked around at the piles of meat laying on the hide and stood up as the ropes fell away.
We choose to join then.
Once the goal agreed, the Skrens joined, and the Vendrix just nodded. The goal woman retrieved her species boon bag and produced a necklace, with a leather strap, and with multiple fangs and claws hanging from it. She pulled it close to her chest, offering a prayer, and put it on.
What now?
I was breathing heavily.
We go home and take our food with us. We'll have more there.
We trudged home, splitting up the meat between groups, the goal taciturn, while the Skrens seemed to have taken a keen interest in Shin. The Vendrix, though, walked with me.
I'm Marilla, Ree of Donkreth, and this is Fionn, head of my personal guard.
Valerie, but I go by Val. Nice to meet you, but I don't have any fancy titles.
She smiled.
This is fine. Titles mean little here, and I've recently become aware of how truly small they are in the grand scheme. How many are in this tribe?
I nodded.
Tell me about it. As to the tribe, me and Keith are human. Then we have the Rithani, Asu, Vergal, and now, the lot of yourselves. I know the goal are physical beasts, and the Skrens are small and quick. What is your species known for?
She positively beamed.
I am known far and wide as the greatest of merchant queens. I own the roots on which the suns never set. Many rivals I have had in my rise, and now I stand over all of them.
By the level of pride, I guessed her species put a lot of stock in mercantile efforts. That meant she had skills we did need.
While it might sound silly, that helps us a great deal right now. While we've got people who are strong, good fighters, builders, and survivalists, we're a bit shallow on people who know how to run things. Everything is sort of going up on a purely needs-of-the-moment basis. It would be nice to be able to have someone who knows how to manage projects.
Valerie, Keith has fallen due to severe sensory overload. He is currently asleep in the shelter, but otherwise fine. The fault is ours. His will was becoming stretched and frayed, and so we cut the connection, unaware of the side effects until it was too late. Had we eased it off, this would not have happened. We both apologize for this error.
Prodigal bowed his head as he gave me the news.
It's fine, Prodigal. Even if he'd known the cost, it's Keith. He'd have paid it without a second thought on the matter.
I kept getting to know Keith at a deeper level, and there was no part of him that was just going to leave our fight up to chance if he had a choice. It wasn't in him, and now I knew the truth of it. It was never in him. Some of the fractions of memories I'd picked up related to fighting showed me a child facing off against an older boy to protect a classmate who, earlier that day, had been Keith's bully. It didn't matter he was bigger, or that he had friends, or that the person he was protecting had wronged him. The older boy was being a bully, and Keith wouldn't let it happen. I thought about my own childhood. Would I have been like that? Sigh. No. If I'm being honest, I'd have probably joined in on the bullying. It was only after I got pregnant that I started to see my own behavior, how I'd treated others. And it was a girl I'd talked shit about who had been there when I found out, and hugged me and told me that everything would be all right. A premier athlete at a young age, I was popular and attractive, and I didn't much consider others unless they were in my own circles. I'm certain that Marilla was talking, but realized I wasn't really listening. She contented herself with talking with the others and gave me space. With breaks, we eventually reached the Glade, although by now it was looking much less like a glade. The Rothani and Asu had been pushing to get the ground ready for tilling, and started outlining a path around to the switchback. Up top, the basic structures of our first yurts were coming together. Marilla let out a slow whistle.
You weren't overselling things here, I see. You did all of this inside of a week?
I shook my head.
Not just me. The Rothani, Asu, and Vergal have been a huge help. The Vergal do most of our hunting right now. The Asu do a good degree of scouting and gathering, while the Rothani do physical labor. I cook and switch between jobs, just depending on which groups needs extra hands. Keith's injured for now, since the cougar attack, so while he heals up, he works around the camp itself, brings in fish, makes rope, a lot of the small work that needs doing. He'll get back to the big stuff once his shoulder's back to rights. Probably before then, if I'm being completely honest.
Her face scrunched up.
Just order him to stay in the camp until he is healed. Seems simple enough.
I sighed.
If only. It doesn't work like that for our species. We're all obstinate and independent by nature, even those who are generally well-disposed toward working as a group. I order him to stay in camp. I might as well order him to leave the camp, 'cause that's going to happen.
We were nearly halfway back, taking a break in the shade, when we heard it. Shin and the Screns caught it first, the ears suddenly perking and diverting in the same direction. Then Prodigal spoke up.
Incoming advanced minds, 2. I sense anxiety, desperation, and a faint trace of hope. I sense no aggression. The second mind is in extreme pain, and the first is panicked. Their minds are all over the place.
Okay, Prodigal, prepare to broadcast my speech to their minds. Everyone else, we have people coming in. Remember, they are not the enemy. The Kathrall are. There are only 2 of them, and 9 of us. They'd have to be madmen to decide to rush us all.
Then came the crashing and crying out as a humanoid came running through the brush toward us. I had to halt the goal as they readied to fight. The male was one of the Inod, purple-skinned, angular features, and 4 eyes. The center pair of eyes looked forward, while the second pair were angled off. He was stumbling and at his limit. I saw his head above the brush. And then I saw him carrying the other, a woman, her stomach distended in a very familiar way to me as she cried out. He was screaming to us, but Prodigal couldn't get a bead on their thoughts, and the translators were having trouble with it. But then I didn't need it.
Shin! Run for camp, get Keith and his EMT bag. Prodigal, do whatever you can to calm him, and... Biggins, what's your name?
The male ghoul snapped his head around.
I am Traig, son of Gorach.
Right, questions for later.
Traig, protect this group and follow our tracks back. The Inod male needs to rest. Catch up with us when he's ready to go, but don't push him, or he'll pass out.
I ran up to the Inod.
What's her name?
He seemed to understand, even if I could not understand him.
Zira.
I gave the universal signal for him to give her over to me.
My tribe mate is a healer. I'm taking her there. Rest and catch up when you're rested.
He meekly made a motion with his head that wasn't really a nod or shake, but understood, and allowed me to take Zira. Trying to walk at normal speed was out of the question, but would Keith even be ready by the time I got back? I tested the weight of her as I held her, and something interesting happened. Her skin tone lightened where it touched my skin, going to a lighter shade of purple, and I felt her breathing calm a little bit. She had felt cold, but then, so had the male. Otherwise, she didn't seem to weigh all that much to me, and so I started off, first at a light jog, and picking up speed as we hit the game trails. Shin had left a whole trail of his hop marks, giving a clear path for me to follow. Running as we were, it was as we approached the glade that I heard Shin calling out, and when I saw him, he had Ragnar and Greltha coming up behind him, and like a truly perverse relay race, they took Zira off my hands, and I took a moment of collapsing to the ground. When I regained my breathing, I forced myself up and ran up for the bluff. There was no way I was missing a berth in the middle of everything horrible thing we'd been through. When I got back to camp, I was shocked. A hasty shelter had been erected, using leftover tarp, rope, and had even been given a tarp floor covering, with essentially a table made of containers that had been strapped together around the sides. Keith was blinking a bit, and I saw the signs of the aftermath from the link.
Keith, are you all right to do this?
Yeah, not my first rodeo. Let me see her wristband.
He said, not really awaiting my response, and hit the green button on her wristband. As before with the other species, the Inod liaison popped up in hologram.
This is Keith of Earth. I need you to talk to me until I can understand your words. We're trying to render aid to this woman, but I don't know your biology, and I'll need help talking me through it.
The male on the screen seemed taken aback and started talking, repeating the same thing over and over until,
Tell me when you can understand me.
Got it.
while he was doing that, Keith was draping Zira in his winter coat and clearing a small area to work. This was something for him that was second nature. I took the moment to crash to the ground, and if Keith noticed, he said nothing, instead giving orders to Shin, who fished an emergency blanket out Keith's bag, balled it up as a pillow for the woman, while Keith got the coat on her. He produced what I think was sanitizer from his bag, then donned gloves and a face shield.
Val, I know you're tired, but I need you over here. Hold her hand and just help her along. What's your name, ma'am?
He said with an air of calm in his voice that was surprising.
Zira, you are a healer. Where is Nogrex?
Her voice seemed a little weak, but she was clearly aware of what was going on.
Nogrex is your companion, right? He got you to us, and Val here ran you back immediately. According to Prodigal, he's all right, and he'll be along, but he had to rest. Don't worry, he's safe with us, and we have food and water for you.
That same even tone, but I got the impression he wasn't telling the whole truth. Keith turned to the screen.
All right, I need to know if she can use certain medications, so I can give her something for pain.
The liaison didn't seem to know quite what to do, but eventually an Inod medical expert was brought up, and he and Keith went back and forth as he held up various medicines for inspection, rattling off chemical names and descriptions of the drugs, as well as how they worked. He was moving quickly and kept relaying orders to people. Even with only one arm and hung over, he was still right on point. He made sure to structure the room in such a way that there would be as much privacy as he could get away with, and content with his instructions from the Inod doctor, engaged privacy mode, stating he would call back if he needed further help. In the course of things, we were interrupted by the returning group, and yes, Keith had lied. Traeg was carrying Nogrex on his back, and the Inod male was unconscious, his skin a pale green color. I motioned to Keith, and he looked up for a moment, swore to himself, and sent Greltha to go check things out, having me stay where I was, soothing her, giving her water, and even small bits of food that she gratefully ate. Greltha came back, whispering something to Keith as he continued his work, and Keith quietly said something back. Greltha nodded and went back out. I was startled when the actual birth happened, long after the privacy mode had expired. Zira had gritted her teeth through the pain, and then suddenly there was crying from Keith's end.
And congratulations, Zira. It's a girl.
Zira made a labored, chortling sound, and after cleaning the baby off, Keith had put it in a diaper that had clearly been made out of one of his shirts, swaddled her, and handed her to Zira, who was crying. Keith, meanwhile, stripped off gloves and the jury-rigged smock and face shield.
All right, Ducky, need you in here for a bit. Val, I'm pretty sure we both need a minute.
We stepped outside, and once we were away from the tent, I got to those false statements earlier.
What happened to Nogrex?
Keith took a moment to answer.
He passed out. Prodigal sensed it before it happened, and they managed to get his wristband. I need to talk with their medical folks again, but I'm pretty sure it was just exertion and dehydration from what Greltha found out.
Hey everyone, hope you loved the video. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit subscribe for more awesome sci-fi content. You can also support us by hitting the thanks button or becoming a channel member. Your generosity helps us bring you more stellar stories. Every bit counts. Thanks a bunch.